So at some point last week, I asked you guys to submit some of your pro wrestling hot takes or any questions you had regarding pro wrestling as well. So in today's video, I will be answering those questions and addressing some of those hot takes with my own personal opinions. But before we get to that, hey guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Jose Ramos Jr., and if you're a fan of pro wrestling as much as I am, then you've come to the right place. I want to be able to do more of these kind of interactive videos, giving you guys an opportunity to ask questions or voice your opinions regarding the current product or anything from the past. So please don't be afraid to go ahead and sound off in the comments below, letting me know what you guys think, and who knows, maybe you will be featured in another video in the future. But also don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to keep up to date with all the pro wrestling content that is produced on this channel, as well as staying up to date with the J Area podcast, which I released every week. And with that being said, let's go ahead and get right into the questions. At Bill Fisher 304 says, the Ministry of Darkness wasn't dominant, they're average to bad wrestlers in scary costumes. Everyone knows who every single one of them are, and know they still suck, scary costumes or not. That's a very interesting take by Bill Fisher. I saw this comment in regards to one of the White Six videos that I produced, and I made a little bit of a comparison to the Ministry of Darkness in terms of how they could be presented. I do think it's an interesting opinion that you think they were bad to average wrestlers. I do remember guys like Edge and Christian in there. We had APA being, Bradshaw and Farouk were also a part of that. I wouldn't consider them bad wrestlers. At that time in their careers, for example, Edge and Christian, they were still relatively young. So I won't go ahead and say, oh, they were great wrestlers, because they hadn't reached their peak yet. I do think in terms of the presentation, because that was the original intent on that comparison, I think it was one of the greatest things that WWE has done. And that's just my opinion. Some people weren't a fan of that Ministry of Darkness taker run because of its connotation to a lot of cult stuff. But I find that interesting in pro wrestling when they're able to suspend disbelief and present something different than what we're accustomed to seeing. As in terms of scary costumes, they didn't really wear scary costumes, I think. The scariest one was probably The Undertaker, who had his full-on, the jacket and all the black on. I mean, the whole robe was a big thing too, but I wouldn't go so far as to say that they all sucked. I thought if you weren't a fan of how they were booked or how they were treated, that's one thing. But overall, that one is a hot take because I don't really agree with it. But I do appreciate the comment. At KDizzle901 says, Hook needs to go to NXT immediately, and Taz as his dad should say the same thing. Let Taz keep working for AEW, but Hook could do great things if he joins NXT. That's a good point, and I think there was a time being after AEW Dynasty when he had lost that championship to Chris Jericho. I personally thought it was a sign of Hook leaving. There were reports saying that his contract were coming up, and there was debate as to whether or not he would jump to WWE and how they would use him. If Hook were to ever join the WWE, I think naturally NXT is the place to go. Allow him the opportunity to really hone in on his skills, develop another set of moves he could incorporate. I think the overall presentation, though, I don't know how it's going to be. You saw that AEW superstars are able to transition to the WWE. Cody, Shawn Spears, Jade Cargill, even Ethan Page, they've all maintained like the same presence of who they were in AEW. The only difference would be Lexis King, who was formerly known as Brian Pillman Jr. in AEW. Would WWE capitalize on Hook being the son of Taz? Would they continue to portray him as such? Would they change his name? I don't know. But I do think in terms of moving forward with his career, elevating up the card, I think that would be his best route. Right now, his usage in in AEW, it's become stagnant for me. Him being associated with Chris Jericho, it doesn't do him any favors. I think ultimately him aligning with Samoa Joe is great. I think that's a great mentorship that he can learn from both on-screen and off-screen. So aside from the Samoa Joe stuff, I'm not interested in what Hook has been doing. I think it would be fun to see him in NXT, and I think he would fit real well. Dan on TikTok says, could the Attitude Era come back, or would it be too vulgar in today's society with cancel culture? This has always been an interesting topic regarding the Attitude Era. A lot of people look fondly upon the Attitude Era for the language, for the sexuality, for the way they were able to push the envelope and get away with on TV at that time. I think because of the way society, portrays vulgarity and in that sense, it's hit or miss. I think in the sense of the WWE right now, we'll never get to the Attitude Era. I think this is the closest we'll get to it in terms of the storytelling and in terms of that shock value, because we have been seeing a little bit more blood than we're used to. And with the Liv Morgan Dominic storyline, a little bit more sexuality than we've been used to in quite some time. I think once the WWE makes that transition to Netflix, I think once we see that transition to Netflix, that is when we might be seeing a little bit more consistency in regards to that type of content. Because when it comes to Netflix, you see the content that they put out. There's some stuff that's out there like TVMA for mature audiences or something for adults. I don't think it's going to be relegated to just Attitude Era content or TV mature. I think we will see a little bit more elements where it's fitted, where it's needed, and where it makes sense. So to answer that question, I don't think we'll ever get back to the Attitude Era. I do think because of the current climate of society, we'll never be able to go back to that, because there was criticism at that time, just like there'll be criticism for this if it were to happen again. But I do think over the course of the last 25 years, this is probably the closest we're ever going to get to it, for better or for worse. Okay, this next one's going to be a long one, so let's take our time with this. At Rezar27 says, I have a theory. Bray said he had a story to finish. Remember the circle emoji back from the logo during the White Rabbit QR codes? Roman Reigns had just completed what is most likely the best 2 years of his career. 1,000,001 moments to remember. All of that started when Roman came back from COVID and Bray was a Universal Champion in a feud with Strowman. Triple threat, Roman pins Strowman, which starts the Bloodline storyline. Bray gets fired. Now that's where there was a fork in the road. Cody returns. My theory is that Bray was supposed to be the one to end the Bloodline. For what better way to beat a family of Samoans? A family of Wyatts. Think about it. The entire run that Roman had was because his family outnumbered everyone. There were no factions that could stop him, not even Lesnar. They chose someone special to beat Roman, and I don't think it was Cody, so now what do we have? If the White Six ends up taking out Bloodline 2.0, then I think that's proof I'm right. Rest in peace, Bray. Thank you for always lighting the way. I love when it comes to this fantasy booking. Obviously, we'll never know what it would have looked like had the White Six debuted with Bray Wyatt as its leader and be able to face the Bloodline. I think that would be such compelling storylines, especially given the history between the Wyatt family and the Shield, which Roman Reigns obviously was a part of. I think there's a lot of story to be told there, but also I love the aspect of having the Anoa'i family, the Bloodline, actual blood relatives facing a family that is forged. They're not blood related. The Wyatt family were a group of outsiders that came together under the belief and under the tutelage of Bray Wyatt. And also, the early stages of the Bray Wyatt character, you could argue, was a sense of manipulation, some, again, cult following, much like how Roman Reigns has used his manipulation over guys like Jimmy and Jey Uso. In that sense, I think the debut of Cody Rhodes really did change a lot. I don't think people anticipated Cody to be jumping from AEW, especially only, 2.5 years into its infancy. That in itself changes a lot. I don't think we really grasp the level of importance of Cody Rhodes defecting to WWE has on the long-term story of WWE. Because I think you can make the argument that Bray Wyatt and Jey Uso were the leading candidates to be the ones to beat Roman Reigns. It just makes sense. Bray Wyatt was the guy he defeated for the title, and Jey Uso was the first one to challenge him for the championship. I like this theory. I don't know if it was the plan, and I don't know how we're gonna figure out a Bloodline 2.0 versus Wyatt 6 in its current iteration now. I think you should keep those guys separate for as long as possible, because then once you jump the shark there, it's like, again, where do we go from there? And that's why they're on separate brands. I really like this theory, but yeah, unfortunately, we'll never know. We'll never know what was the original plan for that Wyatt 6 with Bray Wyatt, as well as who was going to originally defeat Roman Reigns. I'm sure at some point in time, maybe we'll find out the answer to that question. But for the time being, I think everything worked out pretty well in the most part. This next one is at Adamus9586. It says, there won't be a sixth. Bray was the sixth, so they'll leave his spot open, of course, and no one can fill it. At least my speculation, but of course, they might end up doing it to please the fans. but in my eyes, I think it's much more honorable to do it like that. It was his creation, so leave room for him to see it play out, if you will. This was in relation to a question I had posed whether or not the Wyatt 6 was going to have a 6 member or if we were going to stay with 5. Of course, this was before it was confirmed that it wasn't necessarily the Wyatt 6 as in the number, but 6 as in SICKS. I agree with this sentiment. I think if it were to be a play on the number 6, I think you leave that open to Bray Wyatt. I think just to honor him in that sense is a beautiful and poetic way. If they were to add someone, I could see it being someone who had a past, being Braun Strowman, Alexa Bliss. I've seen maybe Randy Orton is a popular theory as well. But if you ask me for my opinion, I do think we just stick with the 5, leave that 6 spot open for Bray Wyatt. At Richard Goffs 62 says, unpopular opinion, 96 to 97 Undertaker was my favorite. That is an unpopular opinion, and I'm not going to say you're wrong. I think The Undertaker in all iterations had a level of interest from fans. I think he's always been able to reinvent himself and remain relevant in WWE TV. That 96 to 97 run I think is interesting because that's when he had his feud with Mankind. He obviously had a run-in with Psycho Sid, winning the WWE Championship, and then of course the Kane saga that began in 97, his feud with Shawn Michaels. In terms of in-ring wise, I think that's where it becomes an unpopular opinion because in-ring, it wasn't The Undertaker's best work, but it really laid the foundation of what that character was going to evolve into. If you ask me for my favorite, iteration of The Undertaker, probably, and I'm probably biased, but that 2005 to 2009 run where he had solid matches, decent stories, and that for me is the epitome of what The Undertaker is. Not only in-ring, but character-wise. Aside from that, another favorite of mine is that Ministry of Darkness Taker. I like seeing that dark element of The Undertaker, especially because I think it makes perfect sense that he would be like a cult leader leading this Ministry of Darkness. But overall, I think The Undertaker's best runs were in 05 to 09. Not a bad comment at all. At XXGod _of Terror XX1323, hell of a name, says, I don't care what anyone else says, 2004 to 2011 Kane was in his bag and prime for real. That is a great take. I think Kane, in the initial run with the mask, the real greatness really lasted from 97 to 98. I think once we got to 99 and he started talking in 2000, it kind of wore off, in my opinion. 2004 to 2011 is where we really got to see him more personality-wise. In ring, he was having storylines with Matt Hardy, with Edge. Obviously, he revisited that Undertaker feud, got a World Championship run. That in itself, I think, was one of his better runs. And I believe someone else also commented below that they thought 98 and 2001 was a great run for Kane as well. I can't argue that because it runs into what I was saying earlier. But let me present you with the early stages of when Kane was first unmasked. In 2003, when Triple H defeated Kane, forcing him to have to take off his mask, him having the black towel, him coming out chained up with security, lighting people on fire, electrocuting Shane McMahon, that initial run, all the way to WrestleMania 20, I think was some of his best work because it really presented him in this deranged sense of naturally someone who was locked away for 20 years because his family was killed in a fire, he himself was in the fire, he was tormented by this thought of his brother, fought his brother, and now the one thing that he was able to cover himself with, almost like a security blanket, is removed. Of course he's going to go off on the deep end. I think in terms of character, because I have to distinguish it between character work and in-ring work, character work from June 2003 to about March 2004, I love that Kane where he's off the deep end. But 2004 to 2011, I think when we think back on Kane and the longevity of his career, that's probably one of the first indicators that we're going to think of when it comes to his legacy. So I asked you guys what was one of your favorite Money in the Bank cash-ins, and at David Jimenez TT50K, he says, mine is the very first cash-in with Edge against Cena on New Year's Revolution. Gave us the standard. Second is RVD at 199 Stand. I was fortunate enough to see both live. I remember buying the pay-per-view New Year's Revolution solely for the Elimination Chamber. It was going to be my first Elimination Chamber that I saw live, and I was a big Cena mark at that time. So to see how Edge comes out with the briefcase and again, setting the standard of what the Money in the Bank contract does for a superstar, that will always stick with me as one of my all-time favorites. And I think what it did for Edge was great. I don't think he hit his stride yet until after WrestleMania 22, but that cash in itself will be played in highlight videos for Edge's career and for the Money in the Bank match itself for years to come. As for RVD, that was the only, like, one of the first times, not even one of it was the first time that the Money in the Bank contract was used to announce a match, and to have it at One Night Stand. Again, we bought the pay-per-view, and I remember watching it with my parents and not realizing how like hardcore the ECW audience was. So the chants and the vulgarity and just the way they treated Cena was so different, and it was crazy. I remember being a kid watching it, and I struggled to not like laugh or react to it because I didn't want my parents to think a certain way. But RVD winning that WWE Championship is, again, another core memory of mine because it presented an alternative version of what wrestling was. I was so used to the WWE way, but to see how the hardcore fans, the ECW fans, were reacting, that like only boosted my interest even more in terms of not only the brand itself, ECW, but just the thought of other ways of presenting the sport itself. At Rocky Don 3400, this is about the Wyatt 6 debut. He says, it was corny and cringy. The Uncle Howdy thing was bad enough on its own. Hey, it's not for everybody. You know, these type of gimmicks, these type of storylines, they're not for everybody. Some people really like the cartoonish aspect of pro wrestling. Some people like to keep it rooted in realism. And if you're not a fan of it, okay, like, I'm sorry to tell you that. Just skip across it, I guess. But before you do that, I would say give it a chance. Because there's some times where we can learn to laugh at it. We can learn to laugh together. If you thought it was corny, that is your opinion. That is your interpretation. I, for one, I'll speak for myself. I thought it was handled masterfully. I thought the editing and just the production value was excellent. They really presented them as a real threat to the audience, to the locker room. I mean, you saw the level of destruction that they laid on Monday Night Raw. And I don't know. I always know that this type of stuff isn't for everybody, just like pro wrestling isn't for everybody. But I try to root myself in a lot of positive talk. If I don't like something, okay, you know, I might not like it. I might voice my opinion on it. But I'm always trying to remain open-minded. I'll give stuff a shot. And I think we're in store for something really great, if handled well, of course, with this Wyatt 6 storyline. At Joey159213 says, I think they should show up on SmackDown as well. This is in reference to the Wyatt 6. Then disappear for a week or two. Let the two shows wonder, WTF, and who the F are these people? This can go sideways quick. WWE needs to play this very carefully. I agree with this. I agree with this to an extent. I think it would be very interesting to see how the Wyatt 6 could find themselves on SmackDown, because if I'm thinking logically, if I'm thinking in terms of the world of WWE, these are not contracted wrestlers. We don't want these people to, you know, cause so much damage, cause so much harm to our employees, to the facility. Why would they employ them? So what would stop them from showing up on Friday Night SmackDown? They're not contracted to only appear on Raw. But in the sense that it is a business and we know that they are contracted, they're not going to go nowhere. I think we're stuck seeing them on Monday Night Raw for the time being. Maybe they'll throw us a bone and have them appear somewhere else just to keep it interesting. But I do like the idea of having them show up wherever, whenever. You want to keep the audience and the wrestlers, kayfabe-wise, on their toes. You want to present them as unpredictable characters. You want to show people that, hey, this isn't like something you've seen before. This is something unique. You have to keep your eye out. I do agree with this comment. Like I said, to a limit, to a certain extent. But I think they handled the debut so well. I'm hoping that they're able to carry out this level of momentum in another positive way. So I don't know about SmackDown, but I do like the unpredictable factor. We have our last comment here of the video, and I wonder who it's from. It's at Mama Ramos 3. What is it about wrestling that you love so much? I know you have lots of stories. How about Tata Pepe, which is my grandfather, reacting to one of your videos that nowadays this man can do it all? I have been open to the idea of incorporating more reaction videos here. I know I present my own reactions, but I have thought about including people who aren't as well versed in pro wrestling. I'm very selective about who I try to put out there in these videos because I'm just very protective of everyone's privacy. And, you know, obviously you need consent to show people on a video on the internet. So I'm very selective about that. But I have been open to having other people on videos and just reacting to wrestling and getting their take. As for the first question about what it is about pro wrestling, it's that level of escapism. I think for me, growing up, I was always a big fan of movies and comic book stories, and I liken pro wrestling to like a real life comic book. These are characters that are larger than life, brought to life on screen. You get to meet these people at, you know, certain locations. The story element and getting invested in why they're fighting, who they're fighting, and how they're fighting. I think there's different aspects of wrestling. There's hardcore wrestling, there's lucha libre, there's, you know, the technical side of it all, brawling. It's a little bit for everybody, I think. If you like storytelling, pro wrestling. If you like action, pro wrestling. If you like silliness or creepy gimmicks like the Uncle Howdy and Wyatt Six stuff, pro wrestling. It's a little bit of everything. And there's been such a stigma associated with pro wrestling for so long. I feel like there's a lot of fans out there who aren't comfortable coming out and talking about it, but being that the business is in such a boom right now, this is an opportunity for all of us to kind of come together and talk about pro wrestling. It's something I've always been a fan of since I was like 2 years old, and that was 25 years ago, so give or take. I'm losing track of my own age at this point, but there's been times where it's kind of low and business wasn't the best, and I might have strayed away for a little bit, but I always maintained interest. I always had my, you know, finger on the pulse and knew what was going on. But yeah, it's a fandom that I don't see ever dying out, and just the way it makes you feel. I think ultimately, if you love something and it makes you feel good, you're going to continue to watch it, you're going to continue to support it, and that's what it does for me, and I hope it does that for a lot of people. And then that was it, guys. Thank you guys for submitting your guys' hot takes, your questions, your comments. Please continue doing so on future episodes of the podcast, on future videos on this channel. With that being said, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to keep up to date with all the pro wrestling content that is produced on this channel. And I'll see you guys in the next video.